Hello there everybody, Fast Lego Studios here, and welcome back guys to week number 5 of building up the Lego life-sized Captain Rex sculpture. Let's jump right into it. Alright guys, and diving right the way into week number 5 of building up Captain Rex here, we've got a lot of progress that needs to be made in this week's episode. First off is building up the walls or the sides of the helmet much higher, kind of beginning to get that a lot more expanded up, and getting those finishes to look a lot nicer right the way off top is very important for this week's episode. That is my goal, at least, kind of beginning to get that all nice and built up. Towards the back, I want to do the very same, kind of expand all of this out even further with even more plates, and then build up even more kind of layers, finish it off, and then continue to build up the model. So plenty of different kind of aspects of the build to go. And in terms of last week's episode, we finally got to gluing this creation together. As you guys know, got the entire foundation of this entire build whole glued. And once again, the biggest reason towards why I'm doing this is taking into consideration I'm building the full-scale Captain Rex sculpture. It is very important to be glued, otherwise the larger he would get, the much flimsier his construction would become. So this would be a very crucial step in building this entire sculpture. And finally, taking a closer look over onto the detail of what we'll be doing in this week's episode is right off to the side here. You guys can see the weld pattern. We've just about started that in last week's episode. I'm waiting on a bricklink order to be coming in this week's episode. Hopefully sometime this week I kind of get that in and continue this weld pattern kind of running up from here all the way up there. So hoping that all comes in and everything works out perfectly. But with all of that being in mind, guys, I think it's the best way to start this week off with the time lapse. Alright guys, and taking a closer look at the build after the time lapse, you guys can see that I've put together a lot of different things going right the way around the entire build. Starting off with the front, you guys can see that I've got the curvature kind of really nicely flowing back here. The cylinders essentially just running their way back, continuing from the respirator down here. It's coming along really nicely around there. And then right the way beside that, you guys can see this center area of the build just beginning to curve that all the way in here, slowly but surely, once again kind of curving that in, but soon enough that'll all be complete. A lot of building still to go around this model, but for now this is all the progress we've gotten done. You guys can see that I've as well added in this little divot. I don't know the exact terminology behind how this is called, but nonetheless, I've added that into place. And right above that, I've got the marking, the blue marking, just about running right here. Soon enough, it's going to be going into the mouth. And then afterwards, it's going to be going into the visor of the build. So this is just about the very beginning, and soon enough will be expanded in the further updates. If we turn the model just slightly here, you guys can see that I've added it in the weld line really nicely in the end result. Definitely a lot of building that went into this, but I got that Bricklink order in to be continuing building this weld line. You guys can see some of the parts placed right the way around me here, but I got that in, and so far as I'm kind of building this with like having the medium nougat in kind of contrast with the dark tan, giving it a little bit more texture and making the build look a lot more nicer. So giving it a little bit more of a realistic feel always adds a nice touch to the build. And then as we kind of continue turning the build, there really isn't too much detail back here aside from all this really nice shaping kind of turning its way inwards. Soon enough that'll all be complete, but for now this is what I've gotten done. So plenty of building still to be done here, but hopefully by the next update I get all of this complete and begin kind of turning it in, and then begin building upwards and getting all of that in place. And I as well would like to attach the armature right the way into the build. So right here you guys can see that we have the center of the helmet, and to kind of secure that to the neck, I'll be using this brick built frame. I'll be building this up way more later on here, but essentially kind of having a frame to hold the entire build together with a couple of struts kind of running to the center and connecting all of that together. This will attach the model a lot nicer with just a piece of aluminum kind of running right the way up the helmet and connecting all that into place. And hopefully everything turns out really nice and connects properly, but we'll see how the result will turn out. So with all of that being in mind, guys, let's move on to the next update. Alright guys, and diving right the way into the very next update of building up Captain Rex here, you guys can see that I've added on a little bit more bricks going around the front and the sides of the model. But starting off with the front here, you guys can see that I've added on a little bit more height of the blue marking, but most importantly, what I've done here with the blue marking is transitioned the 2 Lego brick dimensions over into 4. As you guys know, if you were to stack a 1x2 onto a 1x4 brick, you would have that little bit of unnecessary space in between. That's a really strange gap, and I really wanted to prevent that from happening. And so what I came up with here is a little bit of a way to go around that, and placed together these 2 Lego cheese slope elements. These two are kind of just meshed one to another and then secured with a little bit of parts right the way in the back of the build. And in the end, it looks really nice and transitions those two parts a lot smoother. If they were to be at a lot more of a 90-degree transition, that would look a lot worse. So really happy with how all of that turned out. As we continue to rotate the model around though, you guys can see that I've continued the weld line just running its way right the way up the model. Really happy with how all of that turned out in the end result. Continuing with that very same medium nougat and dark tan, just in contrast once again, making a much more realistic flow of the weld line. And right beside the weld line, you guys can see I've got the very first plate to be making the mouth of the model. So that mouthpiece that I was talking about earlier here, I finally got to doing it. The very first plate is in place, meaning that all we're going to be doing now is kind of expanding upon that and making that U-shaped mouth just curving its way from one side to another. So a lot more things to go here, but got a head start on that. Just a little bit of a plate here and there, but not too much yet. Hopefully by next week's episode, I get all of that done. And as we continued rotating the model once again here, you guys can see that I've got the ventilation vents going right the way off the sides of the model. And surely, yes, I know there's about 6 of them, 6 or 7 ventilation vents running right the way beside here. It's very difficult to have 6 of them, or 7 even, lined up one back to another. Given the dimensions and the amount of space that I'm supposed to take up, 3 should do for this model. And surely I did compromise a little bit, but when you kind of take a look at other Lego sculptures that Lego has done in the past, they do compromise on detail when it comes to these kind of dimensions. So This is no surprise here. This had to happen because the dimensions of Lego pieces simply do not allow to do all of that there. But really, aside from that there, that is just about all the progress that I've gotten done for this week's episode. I sadly did not get to making the frame of the model just being placed here. I have done, though, a little bit of given idea of what it's going to be looking like in the end. I've kind of taken a little bit of just placing bricks here and there, understanding the pure concept of what will make the most stable connections and how that aluminum rod be running up his helmet. So I've done all the planning here, so by next week's episode, hopefully, I get that all installed and everything should be much more secure once I do all of that. So that'll be all for next week's episode, but with all of that being in mind, guys, let's outro out the video. And there we are, guys, at the end of building up Captain Rex for week number 5. Made some very solid progress in this week's episode, but I definitely do wish I were to get a little bit more height with this model. Simply given the amount of plates that this build does use, it takes quite a little bit of time to assemble, but nonetheless, it's still a very enjoyable process. But going back into this week's episode, we definitely made an expansion from last week's episode. We built out the sides much more, got some nicer finishes off the sides and the front of the build, and included some really nice details into the build, such as the weld mark, got that bricklink order on time. Really happy that I did so as the build continues and does not have to be postponed. We got that center divot right the way placed in a place with having the blue marking right above it. It looks really nice so far. Really happy that I came up with that little design with those cheese slopes. And we got these side ventilation vents in place. So a lot of good progress done in this week's episode. But again, next week's episode, hoping to continue that, build it up even further, expand it out more, get more finishes on the model, and so on and so forth. Stay tuned to see what we'll be doing in next week's episode. But with all of that being in mind, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new, and comment down below in the comment section of what are your guys' thoughts on the final glued model of Captain Rex's helmet so far. But with all of that being considered, keep on building, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.